and always to you are King. Bless and let there be love in our home, the marriage experience ordained by you alone. The marriage experience ordained by you alone.
Welcome to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos, where they explore what it means to cultivate a God-centric marriage by delivering realistic and biblical wisdom, pointers, and insights from couples and individuals on the marriage journey. Join them today as they share some insights. Enjoy.
Good evening, family, and a very warm welcome to the Marriage Experience. We're genuinely glad you're here, ready for a time of real couples, real conversations, and real life.
Oh, yes, we're so excited to have you with us this evening. Whether you set a reminder to be here or you just happen to land on this stream while surfing, don't go anywhere. You're very welcome.
Absolutely. We don't believe in coincidences. And this might be the exact encouragement your heart needed today. And if this is your very first time joining our family, you couldn't have picked up a better night to jump in.
And that is absolutely true. Around here, we see marriage as one of God's most incredible gifts. But we also know how happily ever after isn't just automatic. It's built on intentionality, it's built on patience, and with the hearts that stay aligned with His own heart.
Absolutely. So our heart is to give you a foundation rooted in scripture, paired with practical tools you can actually use any time of the day or any time, any moment at all. And we keep it honest, real, and we always leave room for grace because all of us are still growing.
Right. So let's pull up a chair, get comfy on the table, and open our hearts. You know, this conversation might just change the way that you show up for your spouse, show up for your family, and of course, show up for yourself this week.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
So last week, we spent some time looking at something that can quietly shape a relationship, how easy it is for us to move from what we feel to what we conclude. And how quickly those conclusions can start to feel like facts. And we talked in earnest about that last week. And we also said that we said something that was really simple, and that's that it's not always easy to practice, to practice slowing down the story and, without first interpreting the thing, the situation before it becomes the final one.
And once you do that, once you pause, once you don't run with the assumption, you're left with a question because now you're no longer certain. But you still feel something. You still feel that nudge. And that's usually the moment where people hesitate, where you say in your mind, do I say something or do I just leave it? And if I do say something, how do I then say it without coming across the wrong way?
Absolutely. Because you can have the right intention and you still create tension, in what you say. You can ask a genuine question, but if that question doesn't come across well, if it comes across like a conclusion, then it won't feel safe to answer it.
Right.
And maybe the switch that we're making this week isn't just about asking, it's not just about us asking the question, but more about how we ask those questions.
That's interesting. It's not just the words, the tone, everything.
Yeah,
Yes.
the tone, the timing, even the body language, the posture are behind the words, because people look at all of those things. All of those things speak. you know, and sometimes they even speak louder than the words, the question that we're about to ask itself. And so today we're not looking at what to say, but we're looking at how to check in a way that keeps the conversation open and doesn't create the very tension that we're trying to avoid.
You know, that tends to happen quite often, in not just in marriages, in life situations. At times you think that, you know, you set out to solve a problem, but what you're actually doing is creating a bigger,
another one,
you know, or another question, another problem as well. Reminds me, can't remember with Ireland it was now. I think it was in Tasmania or somewhere. Tasmania, just off Australia. And there was a problem with some kind of rodent or something, and
I remember
and they brought in some animal to deal with the rodents, and that animal was even more destructive than yes. So it's you know, no one's trying to create tension here. You're trying to understand something, clear something up, stay connected. But then somehow, even with the best of intentions, the conversation can still feel a bit difficult. You ask a simple question, and the atmosphere changes slightly, not seriously always, but just enough to feel it, to feel that there's something off. And suddenly you are thinking, that didn't land the way I meant to, did it?
You're listening to the Marriage Experience Program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
And I think part of it is that we often focus on what we are saying, but the other person is receiving how we are saying it. And you know, like we said before, tone carries a lot. Like a proverb in Yoruba that you can say you are sorry, you can apologize in a way that comes across as you being genuinely sorry. And you can also apologize the same words, and of course, the person you're apologizing to knows that you don't even mean it.
So you know,
beyond the edge of your tongue.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that you can say, you know, I'm truly sorry. And the other example is, look, I've said I'm sorry, okay?
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, maybe not even
not
even the mild,
dramatic,
even the mild I'm sorry, you know, or I'm sorry, you know. So it's the same I'm sorry you've said, but someone can hear it that you're not actually sorry. And, you know, we're talking about these small things. We're talking about the pace, the facial expression, the timing. All of these add meaning before the words even hit the person you're speaking to. And you might be asking a genuine question, but if there's a slight edge in your tone, or if it comes right after a moment of frustration, it can feel like something else, like less like a question than more like a conclusion, you know, in disguise. You know?
And probably even an affront as well. And in reality, we've all been on both sides of that, where someone says something and you find yourself responding to the tone more than the words. Or you hear the question, but what lands is what you think it implies.
It still
not
goes
what
back.
The person is saying.
Still goes back to what we were talking about before, assumptions, you know. So you who made the assumption, coming to the person you assumed something about, that person to make an assumption. So then where does it stop?
All right, then stop talking. So have you ever had that moment where you think, I know what they're asking, but it doesn't feel like just a question? And then, of course, on the other side, have you ever heard something and thought, that came out more serious than I meant it to? You just think within yourself.
Absolutely. You know, so, I mean, of course, between us, we've experienced it several times where something that, you know, when you're asked a question, you can feel, oh, this is a leading question, or this is heading somewhere. There's going to be a you did so and so, or this was what you did. This was how I felt when you did so and so. Coming on the back of that question, that question wouldn't just be just that straightforward, innocent question that it sounds like. You can feel it. And of course, there have been times also that I've said things to you that I'm trying to go a certain, I'm trying to head a certain direction, but by the time I say it, obviously because of what's on my inside, that I'm trying to mask by asking the question, it comes out differently than I wanted it to. I wanted it to come
pretty obvious.
Exactly. I wanted it to come out neutral, but then it ends up coming out weighted with whatever is on my inside, because I didn't separate myself first from what's going on inside, so that when I said what I said, it actually came out coated in whatever I was carrying on my inside. And so I believe that what sits underneath all of this, like I was just explaining, is the emotion that hasn't quite been named yet,
or acknowledged
yeah,
by the speaker.
Yeah, because sometimes the question carries more than curiosity, and it might carry the frustration, which I was explaining. It might carry the frustration, or even the disappointment, or just tiredness, and even if you don't say that part, it still comes through until it's been dealt with, until it's been, like you said, acknowledged, and maybe even give yourself time to think it through before bringing it to the table. And who knows, maybe by the time you even think it through, it might not even be worth much to bring to the table for a conversation at all.
Yeah. So what we're saying that here is that it's possible to ask the right question, but with the wrong tone, and that's usually where tension begins to fester. Which means that the goal isn't just to find better words. It becomes to be aware of what we're carrying into the conversation. So like you did explain, it's looking inside first, looking inwards first, dealing with that first, because you can only go so far to mask what your true intentions are or what your true feelings are, because that's what the other person begins to feel, and that's what they actually feel first. Not your words. They feel, what's the term to use here? Now they feel your body language.
They feel your vibe.
They feel your
energy.
Vibe. Oh, your energy. That's a more of a Gen Z thing. Before they actually hear your words, and because they feel that, they immediately begin to form an opinion, and if it's strong enough, your words, the wall comes up
straight away,
and your words go nowhere.
Yeah.
And sometimes, just noticing that is enough to change how we approach it. Noticing not just the situation within yourself, but also noticing the feedback that you're getting from your spouse. It's enough for you to go, okay, there's something not right here. I need to check myself out. I need to check what I'm saying out, or how I'm behaving, or how I'm presenting myself in the situation. I need to make sure that it actually aligns with what I want to say.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience Program with Ayakole and Bosade Santos.
Now, James 1:19 talks about being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Of course, we're not so much as talking about the anger part today, but we're talking more about the listening and the speaking. And I think part of that is exactly about not rushing the moment, but being aware, just as you mentioned, of what we're bringing into that conversation, which, we're not pushing aside. This conversation needs to be had, because we had talked about not making assumptions, but clarifying from your spouse what you think you felt, because before it becomes personal. And so maybe the next question that we want to be asking is that if good intentions aren't enough on their own, what actually makes a conversation feel safe? So if we're saying it's not just what you ask, but how you bring it, then
how you bring it to the table.
Yeah, then I think it helps to name something quite clearly. There's a difference between checking in and confronting.
Wow.
So there's, because it's a thin, very thin line
Mm-hmm.
between the two, and it's bordering on what we're talking about in terms of your body language, the timing, not the timing, meaning the frame of mind of the person you even want to speak to, or even your own frame of mind, and the choice of words that you use. And of course, like we said, dealing with what's already on the inside, that assumption that we've already made, so that number one, the other person doesn't make an assumption, and then number two, they don't put up their wall that would stop them from hearing whatever you have to say.
Absolutely. And on the surface, they can sound very similar, and you can use almost the same words, but they land completely differently. One is open, and the other is already decided. Checking in has a certain.
I wonder which is decided.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is that feel to it. It feels light, and this is checking in we're talking about. Even if the topic isn't light, checking in has empathy. Checking in has a willingness to be wrong. There's space in it. You're not trying to prove anything. You're trying to understand. So it might sound something like, hey, can I check something with you? Or I might be reading this wrong, but can I ask? And even hearing that, your body doesn't tense up. Now, caveat here that you can actually say that wrong as well.
Absolutely.
I might be reading this wrong. I mean, that could come out very sarcastic. Yeah, but confronting has a different tone. When we're confronting, no matter how
I think
subtle.
it's the psychological aspect of it that actually makes it that carries through in the words that we use. So no matter how soft we even frame the words or say the words, I think once the head is in that confronting, because of the assumption and the conclusion that has already been made
before the interaction,
there is no how you say it. It will seep through.
It will seep through. And it could come up a lot more serious than or more fixed or more, like you said, confrontational as you intended. Like the conclusion has already been reached and now it's being presented. In other words, I have seen something, I have gone through the analysis in my mind, I've come to a conclusion. Now I'm approaching you to give you the final report, the final accident investigation report. Yeah.
And of course, instead of it sounding or instead of it hitting the hearer's ear as, may I check something with you? Then to them, what they hear is, why did you, or you always, or you never, And the interesting part of it is that the topic might be exactly the same. And, it's not about avoiding the conversation. It's about the posture you bring into it. One posture says, help me understand. And the other one says, explain yourself, So have you ever noticed how quickly a question can feel like a criticism and how sometimes you're responding to what it feels like is being said, not just the words themselves?
Yeah. It's well, I mean, not just in a marriage, it happens everywhere in life, where you hear a question that has exposed their assumptions, and straight away you go into the defensive, in trying to defend your corner, and it just doesn't make for right conversation at the end of the day. And I think most people don't intend to confront. Some people do, but most don't intend to confront, and usually it comes from something underneath, and it could be frustration, it could be a feeling of being unheard,
and I think that's mostly it for a lot of people. That feeling of being unheard now translates into frustration, and they're trying so hard to feel heard,
or even something just developing from that, something that's been sitting for a while. In other words, I've been talking about it and mentioned it in the past. Nothing has been done about it. So there's really no point. And by the time it comes out, it's no longer just a question, and the impact is quite different. When something feels like a confrontation, of course, the natural response is to defend. You know, everyone does the same thing. It's a standard behavior. You know, when you feel that you're being attacked, when you feel you're being confronted, well, the first reaction is to defend yourself. Or explain how does one put this? The other reaction could be to withdraw, right? I mean, the thing about defense doesn't always have to come out as a counter attack. You know, it could come out as withdrawal, just pure, you know, just taking yourself out of the situation. But when it feels like proper checking in, honest, you know, heartfelt checking in, there's room to respond honestly.
So, in other words, what we're saying is that the person who wants to broach the subject really first needs to do a heart work. They need to make sure that they've you know done their love work, not going in there to attack, not going in there to criticize. You know, just like we said a couple of episodes back, in terms of spouses not carrying the responsibility of their partner's growth and not to you know come across as if they are either monitoring them or they're
big brothering them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that, you know, that I feel that, you know, we really need to you know, between ourselves and also our listeners to look into.
And of course, when checking in, we're not going to take that attitude when you say, so, well, I'm telling you this in love. You know, that's what the Bible says. And then you start to attack, you know. So maybe the shift is actually smaller than we think. It's not about avoiding hard questions. It's about softening how we actually enter them. We've got to leave space for the other person instead of closing it before they've even spoken. Instead of approaching them already, approaching them with a question after having already profit within ourselves what the answer is.
So you kind of like you are the accuser, you are the judge, you're
the jailer.
Yeah, the jailer.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
And again, it still boils down to the wisdom in James 1:9. That's 19, 19, you know, to be quick to listen and slow to speak. And maybe in this context, slow to conclude. So if how we enter the conversation matters, then maybe the next thing to look at also is how we actually start it, you know, because knowing that now we know that you have to do you have to do your heart business before you go into it, to soften your own heart first so that you are not going into it with a conclusion. So then how do we actually start it? So if the difference between checking and confronting is the posture, then the beginning of the conversation also would really matter, right? And those first few words, they would set the direction, not just for what's said, but for how it's heard and or how it's received.
Yeah. The morning tells the day, really. I mean, it's if you don't approach well, and once those walls go up, that's it. It's very difficult to break them down. And I think we sometimes underestimate how quickly people read a moment. And these things are done within a few seconds. And you can usually tell that is this safe or is this tense? And once that feeling settles, it shapes everything that follows. It's interesting how the same question or the same situation can be approached in two completely different ways. One might begin with, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? And the other might say, look, may I check something with you? It's the same topic, but very different atmosphere, indeed.
And I think it's still going back to what we always say here about this each spouse giving the other that permission. So when one spouse knows that they have their spouse's permission to voice, to air their concern, then I think there will not be that already set mind where they come with the conclusion as opposed to actually genuinely wanting to know, genuinely being curious about what they feel they are reading, so that then they can understand what they're interpreting, as opposed to concluding that this is how my spouse is. I heard the story of a couple on someone interviewing another this gentleman on her program, and someone had written in, a woman had written in, and she had talked about how her husband cheated some time ago, right? And and then she had told her husband that, you know what, you cheated, yes, I've forgiven you, but if it ever happens again, I'm going to do it back to you. That's just my conclusion. Very interesting. This is a Christian couple we're talking about. So the woman said, if you ever do it, I'm going to do it back to you. So I think a couple of years later, she somehow landed on reading her husband's texts, and she found out that her husband had been sending messages to this particular woman.
The dog has gone back to the vomit.
No. Don't jump to conclusions.
All right.
Don't jump to conclusions. The husband had been communicating with this woman, had actually been sending money to this woman. And they had actually also met at some point in time. So this woman jumped to conclusion that, he's gone back to cheating. But rather than bring it up as a conversation that they could have, she went ahead to go and cheat have an affair as well, only to find out that the husband wasn't cheating. The husband and the pastor of their church had been helping a woman whose husband had abandoned her. But because they didn't want to embarrass the woman, that was why they didn't talk about it.
Make it public. Yeah.
But I mean, of course, we're still talking about conversations on both sides, regardless, because you have a history. I wouldn't have kept it quiet if I was the husband. I would have mentioned it to her that, listen, this is happening. This is the reason why we don't want to make it public. So basically, what we're saying here is that a gentle start, it does something important. It lowers the need to defend. So if the woman, on seeing the messages, had maybe had that, even the love walk that we're talking about that says that don't keep account of wrongdoings, right? If she had dropped that and chose to ask on actually being curious, what is this? I've seen this message on your phone. What is this about? And then the husband can then explain to her that this is what it is, because she now eventually saw on his iMessage the full story, the full picture of what had happened.
But then, unfortunately, she's
gone ahead to do that. So the other person in that situation won't feel a need that they have to brace themselves, and they can actually open the story up and talk. They can stay open to listen to them, and also be able to speak their own piece as well. And that would change the kind of conversation that both of them are able to have. And it doesn't have to be a complicated one. And it's often just a small shift in language that we're talking about. So going from, may I check something with you? I might be wrong, but this is how it comes across to me. If that woman had said, may I check something with you? I happened on your phone, and this is what I saw. If she truly had forgiven him and wasn't still carrying on the old grudge or the old sin over his head, she would have been able to say, this is what I saw on your phone. What's it about? And then they can say, this is what it's looking like to me, right? And then the husband would have been able to say, no, that's not really what it is. This is what it is. Maybe brought out his iMessage to show her the entirety and put her in the picture, that this is why I hadn't discussed it with you in the in the first instance.
So I think what all of those have in common is this, that they don't come in with a fixed meaning. They leave room. They leave room for these questions to be put forward and for them to be addressed properly. Leave room for the other person to bring in, to bring their side of the story.
Absolutely.
And that's what keeps the conversation open.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed how differently you respond depending on how something is said to you? And how a softer start can make even a difficult topic feel manageable. I think where this gets tricky is when something has been building internally, like that lady you're referring to. It's been building internally. It's been festering. It's been fed by
mistakes of the
by
past.
mistakes.
Yeah.
Because by then it's harder to start gently because it's actually taken over the forefront, taking over the main part of the thinking. The tone has already been shaped before the conversation starts.
And I think for that particular instance, and for all of us as well, it shows, what do you call it? Something bias. What do you call it now? Anyway, I don't know. It's called something bias, because we've already formed an opinion. We've already formed an opinion of that situation before confirmation bias.
Okay, confirmation bias.
We've already formed an opinion before we even confirm with the other person that this is what it is. And I think it's a reflection on the state of our own hearts. We've been talking about something that's going on internally, and which we also need to deal with. And but the thing to do is to even, first of all, like they say, take a chill pill, pause before you start. Just give yourself enough time to ask, how do I want this to come across to my spouse? How do I want it to land when I eventually talk about it? Because the goal isn't just to express something. It's to keep the connection while you do it. You don't want to break up your marriage just for an assumption or a feeling that may not even be anything. And again, it brings us back to James 1:19, that we must be quick to listen and slow to speak, and maybe also intentional in how we begin what we want to talk about. So if how we start matters, then there's another piece that's just as important. It keeps layering, right? That when we choose to have that conversation, the words come out.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
So we've talked about how we can start a conversation, but there's yet another layer, like you said. It almost feels like an onion, doesn't it? And that layer is one that often gets overlooked. When we choose to have this conversation, this other layer is timing. I think timing can make the same conversation feel completely different. You can say the same words with the same tone and the same everything,
at the wrong time.
but then at the wrong time. You don't. In that particular case, if it's the wrong timing, then it lands very differently, because people don't just hear words. They receive them through whatever state they're in. If they're upset, have been upset by someone else, or if they're tired, or if they're frustrated by a situation going on, the computer is not behaving itself, or whatever, then it's not the right time. You've got to give it time, and look for the right time to approach.
And I also think that this is where a bit of self-awareness comes in to help, that when you notice that is this a good time or just a convenient one? You're not you're not all about, I just need to say my piece, but you're on about, I want to clear the air truly, and I want to know the truth, because like you said, a good time and a convenient time, they're not the same. And when we recognize these moments that could make a difference in how we make how we have a communication. And I think it's also a male and female thing. The woman wants to talk about it right now, here and then, but then the man is not in the headspace to talk, and it's like, give me some time, let's talk about it. And the woman may be boiling that, listen, this is important to me right now, I want to talk about it right now, but then if she brings it up at that point in time when the man already said, let's talk about it another time, she's not going to get the same she's not going to get an effective response from him, because let's say something just happened, or rather maybe because you've just had a fallout, so to speak, but the woman wants to talk about it still to clear things up. The man is not ready. Emotions are already, running raw already. And well, maybe the husband is tired already because of what had been going on, distracted, preoccupied, if nothing had been going on before. And in those moments, no matter how gentle the question can feel, it can still feel like pressure to the other person.
Yeah, and yet that's often where we say, because it's on our mind and we don't want to lose that moment, or it's been sitting there for a while and it feels like, look, now's the time or never. But sometimes waiting just that little bit extra actually gives the conversation a better chance of not just happening, but to come into a good conclusion. I think there's something really valuable about choosing the right moment, not forcing it into a busy space, but allowing a bit of room for it to fit in properly. Where both of you can be present. No one's rushed, no one's threatened, no one's distracted. And that doesn't mean it has to be formal. It just has to be intentional.
But it can be hard, though.
Yes.
It can be hard. I tell you, it can be hard to, just to press the brakes at that time, and, at times, all you could even, maybe even asking for help, something as simple as, is this a good time to check something with you? That alone shows consideration.
And of course, when you ask that question, you must be ready for a no.
Absolutely.
Because there are times that the question is just a precursor to, look, I expect you to say yes so we can talk about it.
Absolutely.
Right. So in asking that question, like I think we addressed it about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you've got to give your spouse the right to say no.
Absolutely.
The fact that you're asking and you want the answer to be yes, doesn't mean you get upset if the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, like we're saying, they don't get caught off guard. They actually in the headspace to discuss that, to have that conversation. And have you ever had a conversation that was probably needed, but just happened at the wrong time? And, how different might it have felt with a bit more space around it?
And of course, the answer to that is yes. It's not just in a marriage, relationship with our children, at work. It doesn't matter where. There are times that, look, I don't really need to have this conversation now. Not because you're avoiding the conversation, but you're just not in the right headspace.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
And this thing about timing and right headspace is not just an external timing thing; it's also internal as well. Asking yourself, yes, am I in the right place to have this conversation and to have it run well? Because if you're still carrying frustration or you're still upset, it'll come through. So sometimes the most helpful thing, it isn't to speak right straight away, but to give yourself a moment to settle down first.
So even this internal timing that you're talking about is for both of them.
Yes.
The
yes.
person who wants to talk is that internal timing,
Yes.
right? And the
Yes.
person who wants to listen is that internal timing also right.
Yeah, and it still boils down to the wisdom of James 1:19. Slow to speak, not just in words, but also in timing. So if how you start matters and when you start matters, then there's one more piece that really shapes the conversation. How we listen once it begins. Absolutely. That is actually in my own opinion, that's actually the most important, because then that's where it actually gets very honest, because it's possible to be quiet but not actually listening, right? And and rather than be listening, you're just waiting for your turn to respond. Happens a lot. And, while the other person is speaking, your mind is already active, interpreting, preparing, even correcting internally. So you're hearing the words, but you're not always the meaning that's behind them, because already your blinders are up, your interpretative lens is up, and you're not listening openly, and you're not listening openly to them, because listening openly has a different feel to it. It's slower, it's less reactive. Yes, it's less reactive, and it's more curious. And you're not trying to win the moment, you're trying to understand it. And sometimes it's as simple as letting the other person finish without stepping in too quickly. Even if you feel the urge to clarify something or to correct something straight away. But often there's more coming. I think one small but very powerful shift is this: reflecting back what you've heard before responding to that. Even breaks that, whatever had been going on in your own head. So instead of moving straight into your point, you might say, so what I'm hearing is this felt quite important to you. Now, that does something really important. It lets the other person know they have been heard and they have been understood. Yeah, and sometimes what you hear might not be easy to receive. It might feel unexpected, or even feel slightly uncomfortable, or highly uncomfortable. But staying open in that moment is what keeps the conversation safe. And so have you ever felt the difference between being heard and just being responded to? And how does that affect how much you're willing to share? I mean, that happens to everybody, I'm sure. I mean, once you don't feel like you're being heard or you're being considered in a conversation, most people just withdraw. And it's a case where, look, I'm not being heard. I'm not a part of this conversation, emotionally, mentally as well. So why should I be physically? So they just withdraw. Even if they don't withdraw, they probably would, fight back. They will kick back, and that wouldn't lead that conversation anywhere anymore. Yeah.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
So maybe the takeaway isn't about getting every conversation perfect, but about bringing a little more awareness into how we show up in them. Because with small shifts in tone, small shifts in timing, small shifts in posture, these can make a bigger difference than we realize.
So let's look at a scenario to put what we have discussed today in perspective. We'll look at an example in a workplace misunderstanding. Imagine you manage a team at work. Last week, you noticed that a usually reliable team member, Sarah, let's call her that, Sarah, missed the deadline. And you felt annoyed and immediately concluded she's slacking off. She doesn't care about this project. That conclusion starts to feel like a fact. But instead of sending a sharp email right away, you remember last week's discussion, slow the story down, Don't let the first interpretation become the final one. You pause. You realize you don't actually know what happened. You only feel frustrated. And that leaves you with a question rather than certainty. Why did this happen?
Now comes the hesitation moment.
Mm.
Do you confront her or do you let it go?
Mm.
Now, if you bring it up, how do you phrase it so that your concern is heard without putting her on the defensive, without having her pull up those walls and just shut the door? So you decide to check in with care. And you ask calmly, hey, Sarah, I noticed the report came in late. I just wanted to check if everything's okay or if there's anything blocking you. Notice here, that question is not about her. The question is about the report. So you're not.
And it's also, and from what I hear, it's also inquiring
Empathy.
about,
Yes.
about her well-being.
So you pay attention to tone, you pay attention to timing, keeping that posture open and curious rather than accusatory. And then Sarah explains that she had an unexpected tech issue with a computer that delayed her work, and she was stressed about telling you. Now, when you hear that, by slowing the story down and focusing on how you ask rather than assuming the worst, the conversation then stays open, it stays safe, and of course, it stays productive without creating tension or damaging the relationship.
And so, what have we learned from the for the next steps? We pause before reacting, and when you feel something, frustration, worry, disappointment, resist turning it immediately into a conclusion. Shift from assumption to question, curiosity. Transform your certainty into curiosity. Ask yourself, what else could be going on here?
And also, you could check your approach. Remember, we talked about timing, your body language, and all that. Before speaking, consider how you'd ask. Check your tone, check your body language, and try to invite conversation rather than defensiveness. Also, don't accuse. Phrase your question genuinely. Focus on understanding. For example, I noticed X. Can you help me understand what happened? You want to stay present in the response. Listen fully. Not again. We've said it several times today. Not coming with your own counter argument or a judgment while the other person speaks, but with an open mind to find out why rather than trying to accuse the person.
So let's try practicing this in your next interaction with your spouse, where you feel a strong emotional reaction. And we intentionally made that example about the workplace so that this is a neutral person that you're not invested in emotionally. So if you can use, maybe kind of practice using that mentally to reel back the emotion, then you'll be able to also slow down the story with your slow the story down with your spouse and convert your assumptions into questions and focus on how you ask. Over time, this will become a habit that will keep your relationship open and will reduce unnecessary tension.
And you could make these one-line daily reminders, which will actually enforce this habit. Remember, that's the way the brain learns, by repeating things over and over again. So you could come up with a scenario daily. It doesn't have to be exactly the same thing. Just come up with a scenario. If this happened, what would I do? And you're just turning them into that, like a one-line daily reminder,
like a meditation.
And it does make it easier to remember when you are in the heat of the moment. Remember this, that it's what is inside and what is established deep inside that comes out when you're in a heightened stress. Yes. So, like, you're excited, you're upset, people who are drunk, the true person comes out.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayakule and Bosade Santos.
Yeah, it's been another one of those very enlightening conversations today. So, shall we just pray to wrap this all up today? Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of being able to communicate, to express, to listen, and to understand one another. You see, the moments we've talked about today, the conversations we approach carefully, and the ones that haven't always gone as we hoped. So we're asking for your wisdom in these spaces. Teach us to come to one another with gentleness, not assumption. Help us to speak with care, to choose our words with intention, and to be mindful of the tone we carry. Lord, give us discernment in timing, knowing when to speak and when to wait. And most of all, teach us to listen well, to be present, to be patient, and to hear not just the words, but the heart behind them. Where there has been misunderstanding, Father, we ask for clarity. And where conversations have created distance, Lord, we ask that you restore the connections. And where it feels difficult, Lord, please give us grace to keep on trying. May our marriages be places where truth is spoken with love and where understanding grows over time. In Jesus' name.
Amen and amen. And that's where we leave it today. But as you go into this week, may your conversations be marked by calm, not pressure. May you approach each other with openness and not assumption.
So we thank you for spending your valuable time with us, a valuable part of your day with us. And we ask you to keep choosing love, keep taking the next step, and may you find that even small shifts in how you speak and listen.
Keep talking, keep praying, and keep inviting God into the center of it all, creating space for deeper understanding and stronger connection.
Because sometimes it's not about saying more, but about saying it in a way that can be truly received. And you've been listening to The Marriage Experience on Heartsong Live Radio, Scotland's first Christian station on DAB Digital.
And we're here live on Mondays, and we've got a replay on Wednesdays if you've missed us.
And if it's a Monday night that you're listening to us, please stay with us. Arise with Eloha comes up at 11 p.m.
And if it is Wednesday today, we have What's on Your Plate with Annette. It's a great lifestyle show celebrating everyday heroes in their communities.
And we won't tire of asking that if Heartsong Live has blessed you, please consider supporting the station at heartsonglive.co.uk/donate.
Also, email us at mexperience@lidiosantos.com. mexperience, experience without the E. LYDIO.
E at the beginning.
Yes. LYDIOSANTOS.com. You could also find us at our YouTube channel, and the handle is that at Marriage Experience without the E before the X. And hit like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you're first to know when a new video drops. Also, download the Heartsong Live app. It's there as an HSL app as well for easy, up-to-date access to ours and to other uplifting programs on this radio station.
And you can find that on the Android market or the what do you call the other one? iMarket.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's us today on Marriage Experience. See you again next week. Stay encouraged and remember, God is already there. Do have a blessed week.
Join Ayakule and Bosade again next week on the Marriage Experience program as they bring God's truth to help you build your marriage God's way. Till then, remember, marriage is God's idea